Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whatever is the situation that you are in. And welcome to this discussion on clinical legal education. The topic of the discussion for this panel is outreaching the rights, globalization of clinical legal education. So we have a very distinguished panel before us. My name is Ajay Pandey. I am a professor at Jindal Global Law School, and I also work in clinical programs as its executive director. And I've been doing clinical programs for quite some time now. And it's indeed my pleasure to be a part of this discussion. The panel that we have today for this discussion includes Professor Wesahl Domingo, who is the Executive Dean, Faculty of Law, University of Johannesburg, South Africa. Professor Dipika Jain, who is a Vice Dean at Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal Global University. Professor Tania Sourdin, who is the Dean of Newcastle Law School, University of Newcastle, Australia. We have Professor Wang Zhiqiang, who is the Dean, Fudan University Law School, Fudan University, China. We have a lot to learn from this very, very eminent panel, learning from the experience that you have of organizing, managing, administering clinical programs in your respective law schools. Of course, when it comes to clinical legal education, we gather that it's a method of teaching and learning law by doing it primarily. And as it is done, we also look at the larger objective, the larger purpose of clinical legal education, which is social justice. Now, when it comes to some of the realities that we face as far as various larger promises of law and the disconnect between those promises and their reality, what is promised to people, what is promised to masses, what is promised to those who need the support and the agency of law the most, and the grassroots reality. Now, of course, if legal education has to think in terms of ensuring that law is inclusive of masses, law is able to serve the masses, law is able to serve the underprivileged, the poorest, the weakest, and serve it in a way that it becomes a tool of empowerment rather than a tool where people would be fearing law. And that is a scenario that we see. We see that scenario a lot in our context, actually, in India, when we experience that people generally are afraid of law. Law intimidates people. In that line of thinking, clinical legal education has tremendous potential, especially, of course, it has potential in other ways as well. But as far as the social justice context is concerned, the potential of clinical legal education is certainly tremendous, and it needs to be effectively realized if legal education has to be socially relevant, especially in that sphere, in that context. Law and its instruments, its mechanisms, its language, etc., for them to be inclusive of masses, I see a lot of potential in clinical legal education. And therefore, I have a couple of questions for the panel today. And of course, the panel would be sharing their own experiences, their own thinking and thoughts with us as far as their clinical programs are concerned. My first question, if I am to ask this question directly coming to the main concern of the disconnect between what law promises and people and grassroots reality, etc., and in what form and in what ways clinical programs can really respond to those challenges. And that question would be, who really decides the agenda and priorities of clinical programs of law school? And is there a thinking to involve the underprivileged neighborhood communities in deciding the content and direction of CLE, that is clinical legal education, and how can it be ensured? So that's my first question. And I can turn to our first speaker, Professor Wesahl Domingo. Professor Domingo, over to you.
Thank you for that question, and hello everyone, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me here. It's a privilege to be speaking to you today. Those are huge questions. Who decides the agenda and priorities of clinical legal education? And so I'm from South Africa. I'm at the University of Johannesburg. And I want to say that we celebrated our 40th anniversary of our clinical law clinics this year. So it was a proud moment for us. And I say 40 years because that's important, because the question asks who decides that agenda. Our agenda initially with the starting of the clinic started during the apartheid era. It was access to justice for poor and vulnerable communities at that time. And it was really fighting a political system of apartheid during that time. And that's how I want to say the clinics at that time was organic. And that's the way in which they started. It was a movement in terms of thinking, what kind of law graduate do you want? And what kind of legal system do you want at that time? However, since I want to say almost this organic rising of the law clinics, the question today is who sets that agenda? So we at the university, we have 3 law clinics, and they set at different campuses. So one of our clinics is in a very vulnerable, poor community, which is Soweto. So we have a Soweto campus. We have a Doornfontein campus, and so that's another group of vulnerable people within that community. And then we have a campus at a clinic at our main campus. So we serve 3 units. So what we've done with our particular university is we've taken the clinics to the communities. And we were fortunate that we do actually have campuses within those communities. Now, setting the agenda would depend on the resources of a clinic. So I was previously also the head of school of the University of Witwatersrand. There, the clinics are situated on the main campus, and it's divided into different law firms. So they do criminal law, they will do labor law, they will do divorce. And for me, the agendas being set is really the resources and capacity that a law faculty has or a law school has, and that really determines the agenda of that. And the operation of law clinics can take place in a different way. We have attorneys, we have what we call in South Africa candidate attorneys, and then we have the law students who partake in our law clinics. It is a compulsory final year course for the law students to partake in what we call applied legal studies. They are divided into groups and assigned to a principal attorney. They meet real life clients, and that's the best part of this, that they are able to engage with real life legal problems with the guidance of a clinical supervisor. So I want to say the curriculum is decided in South Africa amongst different law faculties according to that particular law school. We provide services to indigent clients. So we have a tariff level. So someone coming in, we would say, are you unemployed or you do have a certain earning, and we calculate whether you are allowed to have access. But access to justice is the most important thing for our law clinics as well. And I think in a society like South Africa, and one of the things that you've mentioned is people fear the law. And you have to remember, in the psyche of South Africans, we have always fought the legal system. And so there's been almost a dislike of that processes that takes place. And so now that people have rights, we want to say, well, you can access those rights. And one of the places to do that is the law clinics. So that in a nutshell. I mean, I can go on forever, but let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think one of the things that we really aspire for law school-based clinics is that any member of the community, neighborhood communities, anyone who is looking for a legal advice or legal service of any nature, any kind, should be able to walk into a law school and get that support that one really needs. And I think that kind of a scenario is something that we really envision in our law schools in India, and we have many law schools actually. And therefore, I think this learning is really important. I would certainly like to learn more from your experience, especially in terms of what is the impact of the clinic going to communities. This is what you said, and those questions. So I'll save those questions for your next turn. I want to now turn to Professor Dipika Jain, and my question, Professor Dipika, is about the potential that CLE has, and what is the thinking that what is the true potential of CLE, and are our law schools really prepared to realize that potential?
Thank you, Professor Pandey. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be on this panel. I'm going to be speaking in the context of India and my own experience of teaching clinical legal education for the last 10 years, mostly on law and marginalization, and from my location of being an academic in the global South. We know that the potential of clinical legal education is multi-pronged. It has pedagogical, social, and political value. CLE teaches students empathetic, critical, social justice, and collaborative lawyering. Although the traditional clinical legal education is mainly concerned with skills training and experiential learning for law students, the agenda in a country like India that is rife with social inequality has to be different and reimagined. There is no one-size-fits-all approach for legal empowerment or access to justice for communities that invariably experience intersectional discrimination based on various aspects of their identities. There is need to reimagine clinical legal education beyond sensitization of students. Therefore, first, it is important that legal clinics indigenize pedagogies and practices to create spaces for decolonizing work that is indigenous in nature. For example, in the Indian context, draw from indigenous and Adivasi people's perspective and anti-caste politics. Such clinics should be based on pedagogical approaches that question the state's colonial framing of law, as well as students' understanding of justice, which is mostly drawn from that framed by the state. The community in this regard is the primary source of goals of the project, keeping in mind the complexities, debates, and disagreements amongst the members. I have some more reflections, but I can come to that later, Professor Pandey.
Certainly. Thank you very much. I think being community-centric is so important for clinical programs, especially in a society like India, where we see this clear disconnect between law and its promises and its reality. Certainly. Let me now turn to Professor Tania. Professor Tania Sourdin, my question to you is about as we collaborate, as there are different possibilities of collaborations between law schools globally, what are the learnings and benefits, if you can share some of the learnings and benefits of collaboration? Any thinking on the aspect of how clinical programs can be more impactful if there is effective collaboration amongst law schools?
Thanks, that's a wonderful question. And I think it's probably a deficit at the moment in relation to law schools, in that I don't think that there is as much collaboration as there could be in relation to clinical programs. There are, of course, vast differences between law schools internationally and even within my own country in terms of what is offered with clinical law schools. And it's the question of at what point do you encourage and foster collaboration internationally? So from my own law school experience, we actually start our students even in year one with some clinical work where they're at least observing in the clinic, and then they'll moot before live judges, and then they'll have other experiences. And by the time they get to fourth year, they all have a placement within our own clinic, which is run by our own lawyers. And it's similar, I think, to what Wesahl described in terms of a group of lawyers with a small number of students, which will go with each lawyer, and they're carefully supervised. In relation to collaborations with international clinics, we have had, I think, a bit of success. More recently, we've been collaborating, for example, with Coventry in the UK. And we do that because we have 2 robots that assist, and those robots have been used recently also with our international students. And that enables the student to actually be in the room of another clinic and to consider, for example, how the law might apply in another country. And I think this is a fascinating extension for our clinical students who've really enjoyed that experience. And for our international students who haven't been able to return to Australia because of lockdown, it has also meant that they can engage with clients. And so these sorts of collaborations, I think, are really interesting because we can see what happens in other parts of the world and then see how we might improve our own clinical experience. From my own perspective, we have a number of different clinics that operate. We have generalist clinics as well as specialist clinics. So we have an older person's legal clinic to work with more vulnerable groups. And then we have special interest clinics, so environmental or special interest cases clinics. And some of those are collaborative clinics in that we will work with social workers and others. And from a global perspective, it would be interesting for us to find out how many clinics are operating with a multidisciplinary approach and how well is that working. Next year, we extend into a series of innocence projects with our criminology students, and all of this is very beneficial. And of course, we're learning from some of the US experience in relation to innocence clinics. Again, what is successful within clinics is really building on local roots. And coming back to your first question, there does need to be a human-centered design. You have to very much consider really what are the local conditions and what's going to work for your population in a local area. And by far, our most successful clinic is probably our Law on the Beach clinic, which runs every summer. And it runs out of a surf club on the beach. We're surrounded by beaches here, and people literally come out of the water with their swimming costumes on and go and get legal advice. And that clinic is much loved by our local population. And because of, I think, the way that it's set up, it's casual, it's informal, people are not frightened about going to the clinic, and it runs extremely effectively. But we're able to do that because it's a reflection of local conditions. And so there are some, I think, clinical ideas that can be readily transported from one country to another, but then there are others that are probably more problematic. The final matter that I'll raise is we also do special project work in other countries. So, for example, as part of our clinical extension, we've done some really great work on legislation in the Cook Islands, and our students travel around the world supervised by staff and do really interesting work in other countries. And I think that's a fantastic extension in our region. Again, it's really got to respond, I think, to what the local regional conditions are too.
Right. Thank you. I'll certainly come back to you and learn more, especially the experience of the students that you may be wanting to share with us. At this point, I want to turn to Professor Zhiqiang. And my question to Professor Zhiqiang is about the benefits of clinical legal education for communities other than the students, especially during the pandemic. Of course, we tried and we found different ways to still do clinics during the pandemic, and there was several limitations and challenges. And I'm really curious to know how law schools have really fared in terms of what benefits were accrued through various things, new things that we learned to cope with the conditions of conditions, and certainly those several limitations and challenges of pandemic. So over to you, Professor Zhiqiang.
Yes, thank you. It's a great honor for me to attend this panel. And yeah, it's sad time for the pandemic spreading all around the world, but fortunately, it's not so fast for Chinese campus as well as law professors and students. We are not under such pressure of COVID situation. We so far have 5 cases in Shanghai, which is a 23 million people city. So it's lucky for us. In terms of special condition, we are not so special now, as we feel. But as a Chinese law professor, I want to share with my colleagues some of the background of the clinical legal education in China. The teaching method of clinical law is an imported or transplanted teaching methodology since 20 years ago, when I just started my teaching career. It's imported from the United States. As far as I know, at the very beginning, the Ford Foundation was advertising this methodology, teaching methodology of law schools in most elite law schools in China, and that time, from that time, it's welcomed. But I have to admit that we saw the tension between different goals of the legal, clinical legal education, meaning the tension between training experiential skills and serving pro bono ideas. On one hand, through clinical legal education, we can train students practical skills. But on the other hand, if we just focus on those underprivileged societies or groups, we will miss some part of those skills, such as those existing in the cases like IP, disputes, or corporate or bankruptcy, so on and so forth. So our colleagues in China basically focus on the benefits that we can take from the clinical legal education of training practical skills more than serving its pro bono ideas. And for the latter part, that does not mean we Chinese law school does not pay attention to that focus. We provide other channel like setting up legal aid societies and carrying out activities by students and also legal ethics courses and so on and so forth to serve the other focus, which was originally served by clinical legal education. So my key point is by the term clinical legal education, we may have different focuses and serving different purposes.
Thank you very much. I think pro bono ideas and working on pro bono ideas is certainly much required. And I think clinical legal education can fill that area to a great extent. There are several good stories and success stories and learning of students and empowerment of communities. And we are talking of when we really talk in terms of clinical legal education responding to the needs of social justice. We have this entire vibrant community of students trying to do good work and also trying to make sense of law as to what they are really wanting to achieve. And also assume that larger leadership role that we want our law students to really assume to respond to some of the problems and challenges that we face, and we really do not know where to go and how to resolve those serious issues and serious concerns. When one really looks at that scenario, and of course the disconnect that I keep talking about, and that's something that really worries me a lot, because I see it and it's too obvious to be actually overlooked, that clear disconnect between what we do in law schools, legal education and all of that, and what's the state of access to justice and legal aid and things like that, and community empowerment. And of course, one of the larger goals that we also envision in our minds, and that is of including people in the language of law, in mechanisms of law, such that it becomes truly inclusive of masses, right? In a way that masses should be able to appreciate. Now, along these lines and this thinking, there must have been some inspirational stories and success stories and good stories to tell. So I can turn to all of you to share those good stories for our viewers of this panel. So I'll first turn to Professor Tania, to you, and please go ahead and share some of the inspiring stories with us.
I'd love to do so, and I'm hoping that they will enable me to share my screen. At the moment, I think it's still disabled, but I'm very happy to talk about how inspiring it is for our students, because their clinical experience takes place throughout their educational journey. As I said, in fourth year, they have this fabulous experience where they work within our clinical environment, and then in fifth year, they have external placement where they may work with commercial and other firms. And I think what's really exciting about that experience that the students certainly share with me is that they take that experience from fourth year and those earlier formative experiences, And those experiences encourage them to think about pro bono options throughout their entire life, even when they're, of course, working at more senior commercial firms. And I think that's really exciting. And for some of the students, what their reflections are really reflections on how they were unsure about what they would do in terms of their legal career. But the clinical experience really highlighted to them different pathways that they might not have otherwise experienced. And they are incredibly enthusiastic, I think, about these experiences and how they shape them. And if I can share the screen, which I still can't, I would share with you some of the reflections of our students who just finished their placement last week. I think the enthusiasm that they have about the law and the love of the law that the clinical experience creates, it just seeps through what their feedback is. And I know even when they graduate and I talk with their alumni, they always remember their clinical experiences. And what is so important about all of this is that they are able to put themselves, I think, in the shoes of their client, no matter where their client is. So if their client is government or if their client is a large corporation or whatever, they actually are better able to understand what their client is doing. And I think they leave with a much broader focus on societal benefit and what law as a profession can offer to our society. So I think that's exciting, and it's a wonderful area to be involved with and working with. So as you can see, I'm very proud of our students and very proud of our clinical program. So thank you, Ajay.
It's so good to know, certainly. And we'll figure out how you can share your screen. I really don't know how that can happen, but I certainly request my IT people to help you with that. And I'll come back to you. So over to you, Professor Dipika, now to tell us of your stories of inspiration and what have your programs actually achieved in terms of the impact and what is the way forward. And we are really quite curious to understand and also explore how we can bring that impact that is so much needed. And in that sense, I would also point at the fact that when it comes to education and that to legal education and the larger problems that we see in the world, it seems that it's a failure. No? Somewhere at some points it seems like a failure, as if no, we have failed. Education has failed, and in that sense, I see a lot of hope in clinical programs. And I turn to you, Professor Dipika, to actually share your stories of inspiration and motivation. So over to you now.
Thank you so much, Professor Pandey. So I think one of the stories that I'd like to share is from my law and marginalization clinic in 2017, where we offered a course called Gender, Law and Difference, in which we collaborated with International Commission of Jurists, HIV/AIDS Alliance, and MARG, which is a legal literacy organization in the country. So one of the challenges for our clinic has been that we've been looking at how do we center the community, learning with the community rather than learning on the community or learning for the community. So I think collaboration was one of the ways to do it. So the collaboration was done in a way that it was not just a project-based collaboration, but the entire year we taught together. It was collaborative teaching. And we basically decided to work on something that came from one of our friends from the transgender movement in the country, where they said that they would like a handbook which basically demystified the law, the Nalsa judgment, which had come in 2014, which recognized a self-determination of transgender and gender non-conforming persons in India. So we worked on that for a year with the community. And after a year, we, with the help of Professor C. Kumar, we did what the community really wanted, which is a fully funded course on campus, which is called the Human Rights for Transgender Persons in India. And it was basically a course which was developed in collaboration with the movement, with our friends from the movement. And 70% of our faculty members who taught this course were also trans persons, scholars and activists. And we decided in this clinic to take a sort of a backseat, learn with the community and sort of make it very community centric. So 25 of our participants were grassroots activists, and it was a really successful clinic only because there was centering of community. And I felt like that was a very powerful experience and also a future direction for us to sort of pause and sort of reflect on how do we do this kind of work, and then sort of move forward with hope that this is possible through collaborative learning and taking a step back and engaging in reflective learning, where we also question not just what changes we can do, but how do we learn from our privileges, our locations, and our commitments, and sort of carve projects in collaboration with communities.
I think that's a wonderful example, and it's so inspiring. I often, as a person associated with clinical legal education for quite some time now, I often have this question that how to make law and its processes and its provisions and its language, its mechanisms, its structures, etc., real for people, real for masses. And I think one of the things that Professor Dipika, you have done is really commendable, and that is participation of communities. You know, how much we really enable communities to seek their participation, or is it no kind of one-way traffic? We go with a certain baggage, we approach communities, we know what to do with them. So our priorities, not really their priorities. And I think their priorities is so important, because law cannot happen without people. And that's the larger question that I always have. Law is something that cannot happen without people. And if it is devoid of people, if it is devoid of masses, it is not going to succeed. And perhaps we are in a state where law is not succeeding, right? To say the least. So I turn to you now, Professor Wesahl, for your experiences and stories of success and inspiration.
Okay.
It was 40 years.
So 40 years is a big thing for us. And just to say, when our law clinic started, we had one attorney sitting alone with one student. We had to fight for students to be part of that program, to be part of the curriculum. So I want to just say one of the successes is that in 2016, all law schools in South Africa was assessed by the Department of Higher Education here. And one of the things that they commended most of the law schools was for having law clinics and saying it should be compulsory for students to partake in those law clinics. So that's a huge step forward. I also want to say that law clinics in law faculties, and I'm not sure this is the same experience with other colleagues, has been almost outside of legal education. It is something that a lot of professors say, we teach them the theory, and then we send them off to you, do the practical things with them, take them out. And so for me, one of the things that I think we're trying to develop in South Africa, in particular within my institution, is a scholarship of clinical legal education. And I think that is where the sharing comes, because it is teaching. And often it's not seen as part of that legal education and curriculum. It's where they say, oh, they do the practical skills there. And the other professors who think they do the pure teaching, there's a disconnect between those two. And so for me, the strides moving forward is to see that integration and that scholarship of clinical legal education increasing. One of the successes that we've had as law clinics is that law clinics in itself, because we get funding is a problem for law clinics. We have to get funding from government and try and get donors and bursaries. So it's really dependent on that. And because you have that, you're often seen as a David and Goliath. So you have these large corporate law firms who often think, well, you know what, the law clinics and the law students, they do their little bit for society. But one of the successes we had is that we took the Department of Home Affairs in South Africa to court because we had an indigent woman who came, and she went to the Department of Home Affairs and found out that she was married to someone who she has never met. And so what this was a type of sham marriage where her identity, and the department then said, well, you need to get a divorce from a person, she has no idea who it is, and she has children attached to that. And this became a huge case. It went forward, but it was settled because the minister then came to our law clinic and said, thank you very much for the work that you've been doing. We're going to settle this matter. We understand that this is happening to many women out there. Now you can imagine this woman has to go through a legal process of divorcing someone that she has no idea who it is. And so those were, so some of the successes that we've had at our law clinics as big ones. And then we have had small ones. But what I want to say about the student experience is that it's also given students motivation and confidence in themselves. And what it is it doesn't matter where they're going, whether it's that corporate large firm, which we say, or the public interest litigation that they're going, they take something with them around that experience in that law clinic. And often I have students that say, well, I'm thinking about business law and corporate law in a human rights way. I'm seeing it through that lens. And I'm saying, yay. So at least it is that community citizenship that's being instilled. And so in South Africa, we say it's Ubuntu. It is community. It's not just about the I, it's about the entire group. But moving forward, one of the disparities that we felt during COVID, and I want to raise this in terms of law clinics moving forward, was the inequality in access to justice using technology. And so when we moved to an online system where we couldn't see clients face to face, everyone was saying, well, you know what, put up a online system, put up a chat bot. That was not easy for communities in rural areas that don't have electricity, that don't have data, and that doesn't have a smartphone. So the reality of also moving into the fourth industrial revolution would be to try and understand how that will impact the work that law clinics do. And so what we had, couldn't see clients face to face, but we had them fill out a questionnaire. And everyone was saying, put the questionnaire online. Now in South Africa, we also have different languages. So people don't only speak English. There's 11 official languages in South Africa. And so one of the things that we try to do is, so the questionnaires has to be in different languages. How would you create an online system to accommodate people actually being able to use it? And so when we have face-to-face consultations, we often say to the student, if you can speak Zulu or Xhosa and you've got a client like that, do that first engagement in that language. And so what we're trying to do is to say, well, that in itself makes law accessible because you're hearing it and understanding it in your own language. So we have multiple problems, I want to say, and issues in South Africa, but that's where the law clinics come in. And I do think that we as law clinics would have to think about how we then engage with this in fourth industrial revolution, how we engage in an online environment. One of the things that you asked was, what were the lessons? What worked excellently for us was going online in terms of the tutor sessions and engaging and get students to write and to do their motion of notice or whatever. And so that helped in testing that ability. So there were benefits, but my fear about the online system and even court systems going online is the inequality and disparity in a community. And so that's a concern for me.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think that is so important. Inequality and different ways of inequalities, new inequalities, inequalities in terms of accessing justice, legal aid, and all of those aspects. I think that's really important for a law school to be socially relevant. We have to really think of these questions very, very seriously. And of course, clinical legal education gives us that kind of scope. And I think that scope really needs to be understood and explored and utilized. I have started receiving questions from the audience, and let us take some time for these questions. So I'll come to you, Professor Zhiqiang, and there's this question from the audience about interdisciplinarity. No, and of course, clinical legal education provides that avenue too, actually, of interdisciplinarity. So what is the impact? I mean, this is the question. What's the impact of interdisciplinarity on CLE?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's a reflection of the new direction of legal education and development of legal science. I fully agree with you in terms of the belief that law and legal education should be socially involved. And our experience is that we need to broaden our vision and to incorporate more energy and expertise from outside of law school through the channels like clinical legal education. I give you an example. How clinical legal education courses are not only taught by specially designated law professors. As I just mentioned, it's a transplanted system from the US. In typical US law schools, they hire some clinical law professors who are specializing in teaching clinical courses. But in China, we don't have such kind of positions. And at the very beginning, some professors who are also act as part-time lawyers teach those courses. But now we turn to hire some part-time tutors or professors of legal practitioners to teach clinical law courses like banking disputes, mediation, and yeah, we have external expertise of lawyers, mediators, arbitrators who have multiple disciplinary background and knowledges. So it not only deepen our collaboration with practitioners, also it broadens the vision of students in terms of their perspectives from different subjects and disciplines. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. I would actually ask others as well, if anyone else is interested to take this question. I think it's a very important question. Professor Wesahl, please go ahead.
Yeah, I like that question of interdisciplinary because I see it in a different way. One of the things that we did this year was we had a work integrated learning. And so clinical legal education was almost work integrated learning. But one of the things that the students did, and was an initiative by the clinic, was to work with other students from other departments and faculties. So the whole idea of access to justice, they said, well, let's get some marketing students together, let's get some commerce students together, because we would have to work the budget and the project for this plan. So we got students from different faculties to work as a unit, as a team, to put a product forward. And I think that was very important. So that's where the interdisciplinarity happened, where the law students are not saying the work that I do in isolation. So that was also a very important part. So that's just one example. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, Professor Tania, please go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Wesahl has been saying about the importance of interdisciplinary clinics. And one of the great benefits that we have in one of our clinics is we have social work students and social worker staff, because many problems that are presented as legal problems actually have a number of other dimensions. Next year, we will start our tax law clinic, which is funded by the Australian government. And in that tax law clinic, we will, of course, be working with business students as well, which is wonderful because, again, for many clients, they also need financial planning advice and financial counselling. So having a range of services available is great for the clients, but it's fabulous for the law students who really learn to work outside of just working with other lawyers, and to really ensure that they're able to support clients once they leave law school in a much more holistic manner. So I totally agree with your comments as well, Wesahl.
Right. Yes, Professor Dipika. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, just agreeing with everyone and echoing what everybody said, I think interdisciplinarity is inevitable in a clinical project because, before we launch into the community work, it's really important for us to have some kind of framework for cultural literacy for our students. And one of the ways to do that is through interdisciplinary and holistic approaches to clinical legal education, which also allows for valuing of, like, for example, self-determination of indigenous communities throughout, or sharing knowledge of communities, histories, and places. So I think if you're doing a clinic in this, it has to be interdisciplinary.
Right. Yeah, I think that's certainly it's a very, very important point. And thankfully, clinical legal education actually provides the avenue for education to be interdisciplinary, which is again a benefit that needs to be explored for legal education. There are a couple of other questions, and I think I would like to take one question, which is about spreading awareness about legal clinics, and how can young people know more about legal clinics, and how can they be involved in clinical programs and things like that. So how do we actually, as we reach out to different stakeholders, communities, young scholars, people who want to work and get associated with clinic, collaborators, etc. How to actually achieve that? How to spread more and more awareness that can bring in more stakeholders, and of course that confidence that is also required, that people have that kind of confidence in law school clinics. So any thoughts, anyone on that? Anyone would like to pursue that question? Not really answer, but pursue. Yes, Professor Tania, yes, go ahead.
Thanks so much, because I think this is a great question. I know what really makes the difference to our students when they graduate is that employers want to employ them because they've had that clinical experience. And that of itself creates a focus on clinical programs. So we know already from employers that they would much rather have a student that's had a really extensive clinical experience on the way through their law school. And so that drives interest amongst employers. Alumni certainly send that message, and we're not at the point that Wesahl is with her 40 years, which is so incredible. We're at about 25 years for our clinic, but the alumni send the message as well. And so you've got both ends of the spectrum, or more than both, because the students are excited about it as well. When they compete with other students in their competitions, they win because they've got that clinical experience. They know how to interview, they know how to negotiate, and they know how to advocate. And so the interest in clinics is really supported at a number of different levels. And I think that's great for the students. And of course, there are these positive outcomes in terms of employment as well.
Thank you very much. There is a question that I think we should pursue, and that is in terms of the roadmap. We know the challenges, we know the different larger objectives that CLE has for itself. an example of India, you know, if we look at our own law schools, Professor Wesahl, you said that's 40 years that the law school is doing clinical programs. In India, clinical legal education is also, it's quite old actually. It's at least early 1970s. The universities came up with clinical programs and they started legal aid clinics, etc. However, we have yet not been that well developed that we can actually serve the purpose, right? So in terms of that roadmap, looking at what we want to really achieve, and of course, there also has to be a sense of urgency in achieving what we want to achieve, because newer set of problems come up, and then we tend to pay our attention to those problems, and then the problems of communities and the underprivileged sections of society, I mean, they become a matter of discussion only, not really, I mean, that kind of priority that comes from these quarters. So I think the question is that what is the kind of roadmap that we should be envisioning for clinical legal education to grow for deeper impact in society? Any thoughts, anyone? I mean, this is a question for everyone, and we have to also conclude. Now we are almost nearing the timeline that is given to us. So please go ahead. Professor Dipika, should I come to you, or? All right, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question and something that I have been deliberating on quite a bit, because we're restructuring our clinical legal program at Jindal Global Law School. And I think there are a lot of factors that are really important for a clinic to be successful. For starters, we need political will and deep commitment from head of the institutions, which also requires a lot of funding, full-time faculty hiring, full-time faculty staff, giving credits to students. So there are some structural limitations why clinical programs don't work. And I think if there is going to be a collective thinking on that and institutional commitment, I think clinics can work and can do very well, as we've seen in many parts of the world. So I would think that it starts with the head of the institution being deeply committed to the idea of clinical legal education as social responsibility of any university.
Right. Professor Tania, any thoughts on that?
Oh, I just agree entirely. I mean, it really is about the values of the university, and all universities are here, I think, to serve their communities. And it needs to, I think, be very clear that that is part of why universities exist, not just to educate, not just to research, but actually to support the well-being of communities. So I agree entirely with what you say about that institutional leadership. It's so important.
Right. Professor Zhiqiang, your thoughts?
Yeah, certainly I agree with the concern that we are taking a strong responsibility, social responsibility to serve the society, the community, and the country, as well as the world, particularly in this special period. And legal clinical education methodology, I think, could serve part of those roles in our curriculum and law schools. And I think in terms of the map road, I would suggest it should be incorporated with other curriculum and methods like aid, like moot court, just as one of my colleagues mentioned, and other courses and PET and teaching method. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Professor Wesahl, and then we have to wind up.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and be brief. I agree with everyone, but for me moving forward, I think it is clinical law clinics operate in a social justice environment, so that's very important. But for me moving forward, and I think about, okay, we 40 years, what's the next 40 years going to look like? I do think that we have to think about clinical legal education in the context of blended teaching and learning, in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, in terms of automated systems of what will our students no longer do. And for me, one of the most important things about the law clinics is, and I don't like using this word, but I'm going to use it, is the soft skills, the negotiation, the interaction, things that I would say is in the hidden curriculum. I think with moving into the fourth industrial revolution, the ability to have emotional intelligence is going to be essential. So that in a nutshell is some of my thoughts moving forward.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to close this session. I know this conversation is so important and I have learned a lot. And certainly, I mean, I do believe that the viewers and the listeners would have been benefited from this conversation. And I think this conversation should go on, and we should find ways to collaborate, to work together, to talk about some of these aspects. And I think it's really important. It's really important for a law school to give a due emphasis to clinical legal education. It's really important. And you've talked about institutional leadership. It's really important that if we have to really certainly effectively address the disconnect, and it's huge and it's serious. It's really serious. I mean, if I'm to give the reference of the current Chief Justice of India, what he recently said, he said that the judicial system needs serious overhaul in terms of responding to the needs of communities, in terms of responding to the needs of people, access to justice, legal aid, and those aspects. So I'm going to thank everyone. Thank you very much for your immensely valuable inputs and your participation. And I close this session now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, viewers, and thank you, all the panelists. Thank you very much.